The morning routine at St. Vincent's Medical Center unfolded as usual, but something about the way the early September sun filtered through the wide windows made Dr. Matthew Hayes slow down for just a moment. At 31, Matthew had spent 6 years in the neurological ICU, where he devoted himself to those unable to speak or move, placing their trust in the hands of strangers in scrubs. His brown hair, always a bit unruly no matter how often he tried to tame it, paired with his warm, sincere smile, had earned him quiet admiration from patients' families. For Matthew, medicine wasn't just about diagnoses and procedures. It was about empathy, presence, and treating each person with dignity, even when they couldn't respond. One patient in particular had become the quiet center of the ICU for the past 3 months, room 314. Not because of any medical anomaly, but because of who she was. Victoria Ashford, just 28, had slipped into a coma following a car crash that made national headlines, not because of the severity of the accident, but because she was the heir to one of the most powerful financial empires in the country. A billionaire before 30, she represented old money with new power. But no amount of wealth could undo the damage to her brain. Now, she lay still beneath crisp sheets, her golden hair fanned out like silk across the pillow. Machines breathed for her, and her family rarely left her side. While most doctors treated her with careful professionalism, Matthew couldn't ignore the feeling that Victoria was slowly becoming more of a case file than a human being. He refused to let her become invisible. Each morning, as he changed her bandages, he made a point to talk to her, about the sky, the wind, the latest novel he'd picked up, even the peculiar things he'd noticed on his way to work. He approached her room as if she might open her eyes at any moment. "Good morning, Victoria," he said softly, his tone gentle and warm as he walked into her room, clean dressings in hand. "The leaves are beginning to turn outside. I have a feeling fall might be your favorite season. You strike me as someone who enjoys the beauty in change. The light on your face kind of gives it away." Nurses Sarah and Jennifer, standing nearby, shared a subtle glance. Both had noticed how much time Matthew devoted to this particular patient. His care wasn't just clinical, it was deeply intentional. His touch was always tender, his voice full of quiet reassurance. As he removed an old bandage from her forearm, irritated by a persistent foresight, he kept talking. "I came across a study yesterday, said some people in comas can hear more than we think. If that's true, I hope you know how many of us are pulling for you. You're not alone in this." What Matthew didn't know, what no one could have known, was that Victoria had been listening for weeks. Trapped in a motionless shell, she heard every word. She felt every nuance in his voice. She recognized the difference in his hands compared to others who came and went. His voice became her lifeline, the only warmth in a terrifying void. She had been trying, desperately, to break free of the paralysis, to move, to speak. But her body refused. Until now. As Matthew gently cleaned the irritated skin and applied a fresh dressing, something inside Victoria finally gave way. His voice, his patience, his unwavering kindness, it pierced through whatever had held her captive. "Matthew!" Her whisper was nearly lost in the quiet hum of machines, but it was there. He froze mid-motion, heart thudding. His eyes locked on her face. She was awake. Blinking slowly, trying to adjust to the light, Victoria met his gaze for the first time in 3 months. Her lips trembled as she drew in a shaky breath. "Victoria," he breathed, a mix of disbelief and hope rising in his throat. "Can you hear me? Can you see me?" "I hear you," she replied, voice gaining strength. "I've heard you every morning. You talked about the leaves changing." Tears welled in Matthew's eyes. He fumbled for the call button without breaking eye contact. "How long have you been aware?" he asked, voice thick. "Weeks," she replied. "But I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. You were the only one who treated me like I still mattered." The room quickly filled with stunned nurses and physicians. Monitors beeped, questions flew, and scans were ordered. But even as chaos unfolded, Victoria's gaze kept returning to Matthew, the one constant in her darkest hours. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, head of neurology, led the evaluation. After a thorough examination, she pulled Matthew aside. "This is beyond rare," she said quietly. "In over 2 decades, I've seen very few coma recoveries like this, and none with such clarity of thought. She's lucky." In the days that followed, Victoria regained strength with startling speed. As her discharge approached, she and Matthew formed a bond neither of them expected, deep, unforced, and quietly powerful. Victoria gradually came to understand what had drawn Matthew into the world of medicine. Years ago, he'd lost his younger brother in a tragic accident, and that grief had driven him to dedicate his life to helping others avoid the helplessness he once felt at a hospital bedside. That pain had shaped him, not hardened him, and Victoria admired the quiet strength beneath his calm demeanor. For his part, Matthew discovered that the image the world had painted of Victoria, as a cold, calculating business mogul, couldn't have been further from the truth. Beneath the headlines and boardrooms was a woman full of curiosity and warmth, who asked about his life with sincerity and shared her own desire to use her wealth for lasting good. "You know," she said one afternoon as his shift was ending, her voice soft but steady, "most of the people in my life have only ever seen me as a means to an end. Business partners looking for leverage. Suitors chasing a last name or a trust fund. Even some friends only stayed close because of what I could offer them." Matthew pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat down, his brow furrowed in quiet empathy. "That sounds incredibly isolating." "It was," she admitted, her gaze drifting toward the window. "But while I was stuck in that bed, unable to move or speak, I could hear you. You talked to me like I mattered, even when you thought I'd never respond. You didn't want anything from me. You just cared. You spoke about the little things, sunlight, stories, weather, like I was someone worth talking to." A flush crept into Matthew's cheeks. That's how I think people deserve to be treated." "That's the point," she said gently. "You didn't do it for credit. You did it because it's who you are. And people like you are rare." 2 weeks later, fully discharged and regaining her independence, Victoria surprised Matthew with a question as natural as it was bold. "Would you have dinner with me?" she asked, her tone hopeful. Not as doctor and patient, but just two people who might want to see where this connection could lead. They met in a quiet, tucked-away restaurant, far from the usual gala invitations and formal business settings Victoria had grown used to. "I need to be honest with you," she said as their food arrived, her eyes holding his with unusual vulnerability. "If you want to get to know me, you're signing up for a complicated life. There'll be cameras, gossip, assumptions about why you're with me." Matthew reached across the table and took her hand with the same gentle steadiness he'd shown in that hospital room. "For 3 months, I spoke to someone who might never answer, but I did it because I cared. If you're willing to take a chance on a guy who drives a car older than his medical license and spends his evenings reading journals and experimenting with recipes at home, then I'm all in. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Their relationship unfolded slowly, naturally. The same patience Matthew had shown during her recovery carried over into their growing bond. They shared long walks through tree-lined parks, marveled at quiet museum corners, and found joy in simplicity. There was no pretense, no posturing, just two people finding something real. A year later, Matthew returned with her to the hospital room where her eyes had first met his. He knelt beside the bed that once held her still body, now empty and at peace, and took her hand once more. "I fell for you when you couldn't even speak," he said with a quiet smile. "And that probably sounds absurd. But I fell for the strength you showed without even knowing it. The person I imagined you were, based on your fight to survive, turned out to be even more extraordinary than I guessed." Tears shimmered in Victoria's eyes as she nodded, her voice cracking with emotion. "You loved me when I couldn't even love myself. When I had no voice, you gave me dignity. That's the kind of love that doesn't fade." They were married in the hospital chapel, surrounded by the doctors, nurses, and staff who had walked that journey with them. Dr. Reeves, who had overseen Victoria's case and also happened to be an ordained minister, led the ceremony. Her words echoed through the small space. "This is a love that began not with grand gestures, but in quiet service. One that honors both strength and fragility." Victoria later founded the Ashford Foundation, focused on advancing research into traumatic brain injuries and providing financial and emotional support to families navigating long-term medical crises. Her organization quickly became a pillar in the national healthcare community. Matthew remained at St. Vincent's, splitting his time between treating patients and collaborating on foundation-backed research to unlock new paths for recovery. When asked about their love story, Victoria often smiled and said, "Most people think Matthew saved my life the day I opened my eyes. But the truth is, he saved me long before that, just by showing me I still mattered when I couldn't do anything for myself." And Matthew, watching his wife passionately advocate for families living through the same uncertainty she had survived, would quietly add, "Love doesn't always announce itself with fireworks or timing that makes sense. Sometimes it arrives in quiet moments, in soft-spoken kindness, in showing up over and over when someone has no way of asking you to stay. That's the kind of love that heals."